Zoom out button.
Well, hello, good morning, dear students. I'm back with you, and well, you know, the last video was abruptly interrupted, and I could not complete my point. So, before starting the poem, I'd briefly give you an overview of the poem, uh, especially the idea which Humphrey House has talked about. You see, he believes that the poem is complete and meaningful. Now, Kubla Khan is a poem about an act of poetic creation, about ecstasy and, in imaginative fulfillment. This is a very important point. You know, the poet gets a joy, an extreme joy, a heavenly pleasure in poetic fulfillment, in poetic achievement, in poetic creativity. I referred to Keats, and I told you earlier that Keats gets a heavenly joy when he experiences a thing of beauty. For example, when he is in the company of nightingale in his imagination. So, according to Coleridge, a poet, when he is divinely inspired and when he begins to create, he, as I dictated you in the theme, undergoes an intense and overpowering experience of ecstasy. Now let's see some details. You see, there is a precision and clarity in part 1 of the poem. I'll repeat some of these points at the end of the poem. But look at the order of things in the first part. You see, there is the landscape. The center of the landscape, in the center of the landscape, we have the pleasure dome, that is the palace, with its gardens on the river bank. Right? Now, to one side of the palace, there is the river's source in the chasm, that is the fountain from which uh, uh, the water flows and takes the form of the river. And to the other side of the palace are deep, large caves which are called caverns measureless to man. And you know, the river flows on the ground for 5 miles and then it flows through the underground caves and then falls into a sunless sea, which is also underground. So, to the other side, we have got caverns measureless to man. Now, Kubla Khan in the center can hear the mingled measure, the mixed sound of the fountain, which is the source, and of the water falling into the dark cave. Now, as I told you, the river winds across the whole landscape. Uh, for first 5 miles, it flows over the ground, and the next 5 miles, it flows underground, mm, passes through the caves, and then falls into the sunless sea. Uh, Now, the fertility of the plain is made possible only by the mysterious energy of the source, that is the fountain. The pleasure dome has come into being by an order of Kubla Khan. The dome is, you may say, majestic, and the gardens are surrounded with walls and towers. Uh, Now remember, the doom is an agreed symbol or emblem of fulfillment and satisfaction. So the notable thing is that wherever the word doom is mentioned or palace, it is accompanied with pleasure. And you know, wherever the word river is mentioned, the word river occurs thrice in part 1, and wherever it is mentioned, it is accompanied with sacredness. Now, the center of the landscape in this part is the point where the doom and the river join. This undoubtedly, you know, is in fact symbolic. The center is symbolic of the conjunction of pleasure and sacredness. That is the core of part 1. Now, part 2, in fact, presents the picture of a poet who has been able to realize this fusion of pleasure and sacredness. So, he becomes inspired, divinely inspired. He is raised to the status of a superhuman being. He becomes holy and sacred himself, and he becomes a seer, seer. He is acquainted with the undivided life now. For him, the life is no more divided into sacredness and pleasure, and therefore he has a feel of eternity, like Keats, who has a feel of eternity when he experiences beauty. So, in a way, you know, the part 2 presents the picture of an inspired poet. He has superhuman powers, therefore, people fear his powers. It may, because they are not as pious, not as holy, they are not capable of, receiving the effects of superhuman powers, so they weave a circle round him in order to escape the effects of that. I'll explain this further. Now, the point is that this, um, you know, part 1 then, in itself, part 1 in itself presents the picture of a paradise, and part 2 shows the picture of a poet who is able to experience that paradise and who gets that pleasure of experiencing the heavenly joy in poetic creativity. This is what the poem is all about. Now I've given you the introduction. Um, I have discussed the important points. I have given you the difficult words. I have also given you the theme of the poem. I have given you a complete background. Now it's time to analyze and interpret and explain and understand the poem itself. It will now become easy. Okay, so let's start. I think in this video, let's see how many stanzas we are able to cover. Maybe 2. So let's see. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure doom decree, where Alf the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So Kubla Khan, an oriental king, ordered that a stately, that is a majestic pleasure dome, a palace with a dome on it, be built. Where? in a place called Xanadu. Now, I've told you about Xanadu. It refers to a real city where Kubla Khan used to rule. It refers to the summer capital of the city, and sorry, yes, of Kubla Khan, and it has different spellings. I have given you those spellings also. So, in a way, it refers to a real place. Now, the order was given, and at that place, what were the features of that place? There, a river ran, and the river was called Alf. Now, immediately after referring to a real place like Xanadu, immediately after that, he uses Alf, that is, the poet uses Alf, the name of an imaginary river, or an imaginary name of a river. So, the 2 points are to be noted here. Number one, the dome or the palace is the dome of pleasure, the river is sacred. So, the palace, as I told you, symbolizes pleasure and fulfillment, the river symbolizes sacredness. Now, the fact that the real and the unreal, that is Xanadu and Alf, are put together, we use the word juxtapose for it. Juxtapose, juxtapose. They are juxtaposed together. So this is, an example of surrealism. That is mixing real and unreal. Later in the poem, we'll find realistic images and subconscious images also. That too are an example of surrealism. So this river ran through caverns measureless to man, that is very large and deep caves, immeasurably deep. And then finally it sank to a sunless sea, that is some subterranean sea. The idea is that the river ran overground for about 5 miles, and then for about 5 miles it ran under the caves, it ran underground, and then finally fell into the sunless sea. So all this is full of mystery. You know, he's trying to create supernatural element in the poem. So it adds to the mystery of the landscape. So you see what happened. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round. So twice 5 miles, which means 5 into 2, that is 10 miles of fertile ground was girdled, surrounded with what? With walls and towers, lofty buildings. And there were gardens bright with sinuous rills. So on the banks of the river there were situated gardens which were bright, which were sunny, warmed by the sun. And the gardens had sinuous rills having curvy or winding course. Now, sinuous is one such word which describes the movement of the water. The rills flowed in a circular or semicircular pattern or in a curvy pattern. Rills are small streams where blossomed many an incense bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hill, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. So, there were a number of trees which produced incense. They were incense-bearing tree. Incense, as I told you, is a kind of a resin which, when burned, gives fragrant fumes. Usually, such resins are burnt in religious ceremonies, and such trees are very common in South Asian countries or hot climate. things like Loban, So again, it evokes um, mystery, and he's coming to magic gradually. And also there were forests, that is, places covered with a number of trees, forests which were as ancient as hills, which enclosed sunny spots of greenery. Amongst the forests, there were sunny spots of greenery, that is, spots which were brightened by the sun. So, this is the scenario. Now, you see, he's coming to another aspect of the landscape now. Yes, there is time, so we can probably finish a few more lines. Look, but oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a sedan cover, a savage place as holy and enchanted as ever was, beneath a waning moon, was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. Now, you see, first let me give you the paraphrase of these lines, that is the literal meaning, and then we'll talk of the deeper meanings. So, the poet has already told us that there were forests as ancient as hills. This means that there were hills also, not mountains but hills. And on the hills there was a chasm, a deep large gap. एक दर्रा था वहाँ पे, a deep chasm which slanted, that is sloped, it was slopy, down the green hill across a sedan cover. So on either side of the um, slant, that is, sorry, the chasm, we had, or there were cedar trees. Cedar is a kind of a tall tree growing in hot climate, and they formed a kind of a cover, a kind of a shade. And this place is called a savage place. I'll talk of its features later on. But then this was a kind of a place which was haunted, visited by a woman wailing for her demon lover. Now, you see, in romances and in old stories and in romances, we often read the story of a woman who, having been loved by a demon, is deserted by him. And later she realized that because the lover was a demon, so he would be found, mm, say, in such places uh, which are mysterious, full of mystery, and which appear to be magical. So she keeps haunting, she keeps visiting such places in search of the demon lover. And when does she visit such places? In the waning moon. In the waning moon, that is the declining moon, that is the later half of the month. You know, in the first half of the month, in a lunar month I'm talking about, in the first half of the month, the moon keeps growing. That is from the 1st to the 15th of each lunar month, the moon keeps growing. It becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. From the 15th to the 29th or 30th of the lunar date, the lunar month, the moon begins to decline. Now, this time, when moon declines is considered to be very good and appropriate for magic. So, say from about 25th to 30th of each lunar month, there is hardly any moon visible. This is the most suitable time for magic. So, the woman used to visit such mysterious places uh, during the time when moon was declining. So the poet says that this place was very much similar to a place haunted to such a place which is believed to be haunted by a woman in search of her demon lover. Now let's consider some of the characteristics of this place. This place is called romantic. Now this is romantic because it inspires the feeling of awe and mystery. AWE, awe and mystery. Remember, romanticism is called Renaissance of wonder and mystery. So an element of wonder and mystery is there. That is why this place is romantic. And it's called a savage place. A savage place, that is a frightful place, a primitive place. Savage here doesn't mean uncivilized, etc. It means primitive or frightful. Right? Now, this place is also called enchanted, that is magical. You know, magical. There was something magical about it because it was very similar to a place which was haunted by a woman in search of her demon lover. She used to haunt places which were magical in nature. So this chasm also was very similar to that. That is why it was magical. Well, it was enchanted. And here the poet refers to magical element, and it is very, you know, reminiscent of the romances. Here you can see the influence of Middle Ages, and also in the beginning, when the poet refers to Xanadu and elf, these words also give us a sense of remoteness in time, which is the essence of romance. So remember, anyway, this chasm is romantic, it is savage, it is enchanted, and it is also called holy. Now we understand that it is enchanted because it is very similar to a place haunted by a woman who looks for a demon lover, you know, on nights when moon is declining. That is why it is enchanted. But why it is holy? So the answer is in the following lines. And from this chasm, with the ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced. So what happened that from this chasm, um, or on this chasm, a very powerful fountain or spring was created, was momently forced. A mighty fountain was momently forced, created rather unnaturally, and momently every moment. That is, as we shall see later, the water was flowing intermittently. There was a pause of a minute or a second, and then the water started flowing once again. So that is why uh, it was momently forced. The flow of the water was not continuous. So this fountain was created. And in what sense? Now there is some negative imagery. Ceaseless turmoil. There was a lot of noise, agitation, disturbance when the fountain flowed. Seeding, as I told you, means bubbling with a hissing sound. So, as the water flowed, a kind of a hissing sound was produced. It was bubbling, and it is compared to uh, this one, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing. So the noise made by the fountain as it flowed is compared to, or rather gave one the impression that the earth was breathing in fast thick pants. Fast thick pants refer to the loud quick noise of breathing while sleeping. खर्राटे लेने की जो आवाज़ आती है, तो फाउंटेन जिस तरह से क्रिएट हुआ था और जिस तरह से फ्लो कर रहा था, रुक रुक के पानी जो फ्लो कर रहा था, और वहाँ पे टर्मोइल और एजिटेशन जिस तरह का हो रहा था, जिस तरह का नॉइस क्रिएट हो रहा था, तो ऐसा लग रहा था जैसे कि अर्थ जो है वो बहुत ही लाउड हिसिंग नॉइस प्रोड्यूस कर रही हो, यानी कि स्नोर कर रही हो, खर्राटे ले रही हो. So this kind of fountain was created there. Now remember that this fountain is not only the source of the river Elf, which is considered to be sacred, but it is also responsible for the fertility of the land. So this fountain is holy. ये फाउंटेन होली है. क्यों होली है? क्योंकि इसी से सेक्रेड रिवर एल्फ जो है वो निकली है, और इसी की वजह से वहाँ पे ग्रीनरी है. So because that fountain was created on the chasm, so this is called holy. अब आप देखें कि यही chasm, ये मैजिकल भी है, होली भी है, रोमांटिक भी है, savage भी है. All these positive and negative aspects are mixed together. Magic is something negative, savage is something negative, romantic is something positive, and holy is something positive. So here we have negative imagery also, ceaseless turmoil, fast thick pants was breathing. तो अब कुछ पॉजिटिव इमेजेस भी आएंगी आगे, बट लेट्स सी वी कैन प्रोसीड. I'm afraid not. It's just about the time, so I'll continue in the next video. I'll stop here. So thank you very much.
Stop button.